English translation 821st contact Thursday, 15th September 2022, 7:47 Hus.
Dear friend, here I am again, but time has seemed long in my absence. Greetings, Edward. It is a great pleasure to see you well.
It is also for me. Be welcome, Bermunda, and greetings also.
It is strange, when I am away I miss you and talking to you. But it is not only me, because Quetzal and Ptaah, Florena and also Enjana have already told me the same thing. It is really very strange. You are much closer to all of us than, well, I want to say you know. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, I understand. I guess that is also the reason why you have visited me so many times in the last few months. It has been really noticeable, but we have always had good conversations, some of which I have been able to write down even though there has been an extraordinary amount of them.
It was so, because our conversations were not only of a private nature. There was also a lot of discussion about the chronoplay, but Ptaah, Florena, Quetzal and Enjana, as well as we talked about it and decided that from now on we do not want to discuss our topics so often in such a manner that you should then call them up and write them down. We want to continue to visit you frequently and talk to you about many things, but not officially about events that affect world affairs, for we are unable to change anything in this, unfortunately. If we look at Earth humans, there are only very few who seriously concern themselves with the conversations we have openly and accessible to all human beings during our visits to you, which you then call up and write down. Our clarifications in this respect have shown that your work is not only very strenuous for you, but that only a very small part of Earth humans, who number over 9 billion, are interested in it and evaluate everything for their personal benefit.
Unfortunately, yes. But there are still a few thousand who give valuable thought to what we talk about publicly, that is to say, what I may write down and publish, which also helps many. And the human beings who are interested in everything are very grateful for what I can call up, write down, and openly call our conversations. This is also proven to me by letters, telephone calls and emails, also personal conversations, which are very, very rare because I hold back on them. But all our conversations and the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life helps many human beings to find themselves and to be able to cope with their lives. Somehow our common conversations, your play-errands and mine, and the teachings simply belong together and help those human beings who are really honestly and interested read everything and learn from it, take it seriously and consciously apply it for their own benefit. Again and again I hear or read that those human beings are doing well who seriously occupy themselves with the teaching and our conversations, that they have become free of any kind of belief and have learned to think for themselves as well as to make their own decisions and consciously act for themselves, and thus now have a way of life with which they are happy and satisfied. For all these human beings alone it was and is valuable that we conduct our conversations openly and accessible to the human beings, just as the teaching of spirit, which we now correctly call teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, helps a lot. We do continue to use the teaching under the name spiritual teaching, for which, by the way, Eva bears all the responsibility for shipping and so on, because the wrong word spirit is not so quickly erased from the world. Unfortunately, the whole process of producing the spiritual teaching booklets and sending them out and so on is also connected with costs. Consequently, we also have to charge a fee for everything, because otherwise everything cannot be done. This is unfortunately the case in our world, because everything costs money and is dependent on it, because nothing works without it, which is why we have to work hard to ensure that everything always works out and what has to be done can be done. Even if I see to it that everything can be given and also bought as cheaply as possible, it is necessary and evenly required that the scarce finances can be allocated correctly and that the necessary materials can be bought as cheaply as possible. This also applies to food, which is why, because I also buy food and manage everything in this respect, we can also exist with everything. I learned the whole thing about finances from my parents, that is to say from my mother and father, when I was 5 years old, because my father earned 240 to 260 Swiss francs per month as a municipal worker and as a trained shoemaker, while my mother had to take care of my older sister Bertha as well as my younger brothers Gottlieb and Karl, and then also for my second and youngest sister Verena, who was severely physically handicapped, after which another straggler sister was born in the 1950s. So consequently, we were only 6 children, and the 2 parents who had to be maintained at that time in the 1940s, with father's income of 240 to 260 francs per month. With the birth of another sister in the 1950s, we had a total of 7 children. At that time, it was still common to have high-numbered families, that is to say father, mother, and many children. There was no pocket money for us children, and at that time it was not usual for children to receive pocket money from their parents, so my siblings and I had to earn it ourselves. We earned it by picking berries in the woods and selling them to the housewives, and also by collecting broken glass from the then frequent rubbish pits, which we could sell at the Bleich glassworks for 5 centimes per kilo. We also collected scrap metal in the waste pits, which we could sell to the scrap metal dealer who came by every month from Zurich on his bicycle and trailer. And to make sure we had enough to eat, I worked for the farmer's wife Louise, where I helped cut and collect grass. Louise lived in the neighborhood, ran a small farm, and had a pitch-black smokehouse where bacon and smoked sausages were smoked. In addition, we could still grasp in the military barracks, which meant that we could fetch food in milk pots from the military kitchen every day, so we always had enough to eat. This was arranged by relatives of ours who were catering in the military barracks. Sweets such as chocolate and so on were a luxury we could not afford. Finally, one day a woman on the street who worked in a factory in Jacobsthal beckoned me over and heard about our large family. The woman, who was already older, explained that from then on she wanted to do something for us children and would bring us in time, that is to say, small coins and some chocolate, which I was of course happy about and thanked her for. After a while, however, an evil sectarian got hold of this and sued me at the municipality with the lie that I had begged from the woman in question and extorted money from her. In addition, this sectarian harangued me at every opportunity that I should find my way to the Savior, because he would help me not to go begging, and so on. Horat was the name of the woman, a believer and member of the Methodist sect, to whom I said that I did not need a Savior, after which she began to harass and bully me wherever she could. She would also often lie in wait for me and beat me up when she could catch me. And because I once told her that I did not believe in a God, angels, or even a Savior, but that I thought for myself and knew that all existence was simply a creational energy and nothing else, which had created everything, continued to create unstoppably, and would one day let everything pass away again, only to create it again in a higher form, she got angry and shouted that she would get it from me and that I would experience my blue miracles, because God and His Son, the Savior, would not allow themselves to be mocked. Unfortunately, this led to me spending my life, well, because you know what has been going on through my life. Bernadette has also written a biography about me, which has so far resulted in 2 large volumes, and clarifies, no, 2 or 3 more volumes will follow, because the first 2 only show the time up to the end of 1962, what really happened throughout my life due to the hatred of this Mrs. Horat, whereby even the authorities in high places of the canton played along badly and ensured that I was also treated badly in foreign countries. but what I still want to say is that my parents' house, which my father had built himself with a construction company, became too small over the years, so mother and I dug up the ground on the west side of the house, where a cellar was then built, and above it 2 rooms and an attic, and a veranda was added along the southeast side of the house. My parents and I worked diligently on this, as did my father's friend, the plumber Fritz Seidel, who was responsible for making and installing the gutters. My sister Berta and my brothers Gottlieb and Karl were otherwise engaged, and they have all passed away. The 2 brothers, Karl in 1984, Gottlieb in 1997, the sisters Verena in 2000, and Berta in 2021. The parents also in the last century, father in 1989 and mother in 1994. So only Hedwig, born in 1950, and Heidi, born in 1958, remained so far, as of course I, who was born on February 3, 1937.
I know that also I have learnt a lot from the annals of Svarhof, because he has written down everything that has happened, also that he has let you see many things that are still a secret to Earthhumans and perhaps will remain one for all time. That he has let you see the whole earth, also the depths and the manifold life in the seas, in the rainforests and in the mountains, and so on, that he has described in his annals. Consequently, you were able to see more than is actually possible for an Earthhuman.
Yes, I have really seen and learned a great deal with Svarhof, as I have also seen things that not only may but will forever remain a mystery to Earthlings. When I think alone of what I was allowed to observe with Svarhof in the 1940s in the depths of the seas, such as the giant squid, which was 21 meters in length as Svarhof measured it, as well as the giant ship Titanic, which sank and was broken into 2 parts because it rammed an iceberg and sank, where the ship then sank, just torn into 2 parts several hundred meters apart to a depth of almost 4,000 meters. I also learned from Svarhof that even steel can be eaten away by bacteria, and he explained that around 30 species of bacteria will eat away at the ship in such a way that nothing will exist of the ship in 700 years. The Mariana Trench at around 11,000 meters depth of the sea was also something where he let me see how deep the sea actually is at the deepest point. Mud volcanoes in Indonesia were also something I could not observe anywhere else in the world in the way it was there. I will also never forget being in the high mountains of the Andes, where there is a huge desert and a huge salt lake, as well as making friends with an Andean bear that accompanied Svarhof and me for days on end. The fact that he then took me back to the time of the Incas, as well as to other times and to earlier peoples around the world, whereby I saw, experienced, and learned that many things were quite different from what the clever ancient historians, the archaeologists and so on simply fantasize, assume and even coldly assert is for me what they say, that the Earthlings are being led around by the nose by the supposedly knowing experts through their sick delusions of grandeur. That is why it is also pointless to try to correct their claims. Svarhof let me see many things that remain hidden from the Earthlings, or will only be recognized in the distant future, such as the threadworms in the sea, whose real name I have forgotten, but which rise like long threads in the sea and are collected by the natives as food. The human beings are lied to many times by the assumptions of the antiquarians, who collect their bogus findings as sure findings, which are, however, naked misstatements, because the truth is quite different.
I know that, but Earthhumans do not think about that at all, because they are traditionally believers regarding a might above them, but especially misled in terms of faith by believers in religion, who imagine the delusion of a creator above them and have been spreading this since ancient times and misleadingly as false doctrine.
On Earth, religious believers have been manipulating Earthhumans since time immemorial by suggesting and indoctrinating the unstable and gullible with a godfather and creator. In terms of religion, everything is geared towards making the Earthlings believe that a god is above everything, so it is not the human being who thinks and directs. But thinking is actually laudable, because a believing human being does not think but believes, and the human being who is religious not only believes in a God creator but in every nonsense that is told to him. It is not only the God-believing religionists, the pastors and preachers and so on who come to mind, but also the believers from the people and the other religious dignitaries, as well as the rest of the fraudsters who swindle their money in the name of religion. Of all the religions, the Christian one stands out especially, which misteaches the nonsense of a Son of God who is given the name Jesus Christ, but whose real name was Emmanuel, and who never taught the nonsense that is attributed to him to this day.
It is incomprehensible to me that human beings can believe such nonsense, as well as religious claims and lies resulting from religions, without hesitation and consider and accept them as truth. Surely this testifies to a lack of thinking and to the fact that the human being in question is so impressionable that truth remains foreign to him, and he is so dependent on faith that it forms his actual purpose in life, from which he cannot get away, cannot exist without it, and consequently can never be himself.
That is the point, because these human beings are unquestioning about their faith, which means that they do not think but simply believe. This is because they are incapable of really thinking for themselves and of not being stupid because of the faith that has been suggested to them and indoctrinated into them. Not thinking is what is generally called stupidity, which means that the human being who does not think for himself is stupid. But this also means that it cannot be any kind of insult when a human being is told that he is stupid, for this only tells him that he does not think, and does not think truthfully, but only superficially, in such a way that he is able to creep through his life and existence in accordance with his senses and aspirations. Stupidity, then, is nothing other than not thinking for oneself in a truthful way, that is to say, in a way that is only superficial, faith-based, and thus unrealistic, and thus far from the effective truth. In their faith, human beings are even of the erroneous opinion. Opinion is in any case false, because it is not a truth but an assumption that effective truth is false and void, because they esteem their faith high and valuable and place it above all truth and every rational self-thinking. The human being regards faith much higher and as the correctness of truth, while he scorns effective truth and classifies it as a lie. Consequently, he cannot find it and endlessly rots in his personal faith and cannot get free from it. But as he walks along in religious faith, so he also leads his life, and that according to the age-old principle of if you do not want to be my brother, I will smash your skull in. And truly this thought, which has been ingrained in human beings since time immemorial, exists as a principle. Consequently, they also use it for every evil form of self-defense as soon as something comes against them that does not correspond to their ideas and will. This selfish will in the believing human being is so firmly anchored in him that he represents it as a right and even starts and wages wars because of it, whereby he kills fellow human beings without hesitation if they are considered enemies. In this consequence, for the human being there are only friends and enemies, but not fellow human beings of equal value, whose life and existence should be respected, not murdered, and thus not extinguished but protected. But exactly the opposite is done by believing human beings. For they do not think for themselves, but believingly represent and do what the confused faith misleads and demands. Namely, that the enemy is to be exterminated and destroyed, as the phrase, "If you do not want to be my brother, then I will smash your skull in," has demanded since time immemorial, just as it is written in the Holy Scriptures, that injustice is to be punished and the life of the wrongdoer is to be ended. This is to be done through revenge in the form of the death penalty, with manslaughter, war and murder, as is currently happening again in Ukraine, where torture and murder are being carried out without exception on both sides of the opposing parties, whereby, however, one side is made to look like a pig almost worldwide, and all evil deeds are attributed solely to the opposing party, in this case Russia. This while the warmonger and war criminal Zelensky is lifted high and higher in the sky and Putin is put down. It is clear, however, that both sides are doing wrong because war and torture, murder and manslaughter do not solve any problems but only make things worse, as is also the case when war crimes are committed and blamed on the enemy, as is done without exception in Ukraine, as is done in every war. However, in the war in Ukraine, no warring party is better than the other, because both sides are in the wrong, because war and murder are not only reprehensible but also unworthy of human beings and in general, absolutely criminal with regard to the destruction of life. That America is behind the whole war in Ukraine with NYTOW behind it, and that Zelensky, as a lackey of the United States of America and NATO, is doing exactly what America wants cannot be doubted, because only stupid people are not able to recognize this truth. Others, however, may not realize this because they are dependent on America or are simply afraid that the United States of America would get on their nerves. The very fact that America is spending billions of dollars to prop up the warmonger Zelensky and urge him to continue to drag out the war should give pause for thought to those who are actually able to think halfway. Unfortunately, however, these persons who are still halfway capable of thinking are obviously not to be found in the governments, so that it is not possible to prove to those in power what is actually being played out with regard to Ukraine, and that it is only a matter of furthering the plans of the American addiction to hegemony. Thus the stupid rulers and the stupid of the people continue to advocate that weapons be supplied to the world's begging and warmongering and lying and stupid Zelensky, the non-thinking and simple-minded lackey of America. This whereby the war crimes as well as the rapes of women, the tortures and deadly massacres continue unchecked and go on longer and longer.
The arms supplies and finances of America and the other states, as well as their sections of the pro-American and other bourgeoisie, are not ending the war in Ukraine by taking sides with Ukraine, but are prolonging it senselessly and criminally through their guilt. Particularly the rulers and supporters from the European Union dictatorship and Germany are to be mentioned, as well as from various other countries, who in their stupidity do not recognize what is actually being played, that America with its NYTOW is behind everything, and that all those are being misled and abused for their secret hegemony behavior, who are stupid enough to believe what is being presented to them by America and Zelensky in a lying and truth-twisting manner. Those who do or advocate the supplying of arms, they are all guilty of the war and the mass massacres of the population and the murder and assassination of the soldiers of the Ukrainian and Russian militaries and the many civilians, women, children and men, which could be avoided if arms were not supplied to Ukraine in an unthinking, biased and criminal manner. This is truly a criminal act that America's leaders have planned and arranged from the very beginning in order to get closer to fulfilling their delusions of world domination. That Russia is to be forced down in the process, which has been the aspiration of America, that is to say its leaders and dark government for centuries, is now to be realized through the Ukraine war. This is now to become reality through the sham friend of America and the desired membership in the European Union, whereby the non-thinking and consequently stupid and power-addicted clown and actor Volodymyr Zelensky was elected president of Ukraine, who has now truly become a conscience-less war criminal. This is because he can conscience-lessly continue the war longer and longer in the interests of America by keeping the weapons of various states, because America, together with the American NATO, wants to bring the state of Russia under American rule. The fact that thousands of civilians are tortured and murdered in the process, both by the hostile Russian military and also by the Ukrainian military, only encourages one-sided hatred of Russia, because all the atrocities are usually attributed to the Russian army. However, the fact that the Ukrainian military also commits atrocities and rapes women, whom they then usually shoot and bury, is not mentioned, and the good and brave defenders of the country who are willing to sacrifice themselves are praised to the skies. You have been able to observe it yourself from the flying apparatus together with me, so you know that this is the truth. The leaders of various states are stupid, America-loving and Zelensky-loving, as well as irresponsible elements who do not think and supply weapons and finances to Ukraine, because this prolongs the war, as well as the killing, torturing, massacring and destroying goes on endlessly. All the states and populations supplying weapons and finance for warfare are guilty of a world war that is being waged in this particular way of unilateral, irresponsible arms assistance and which has never been seen before on Earth. The powerful leaders and large sections of the populations of the western states, as well as the states and populations of the eastern, northern and southern states which are in bondage to the western states and America, are interfering in matters from which they should keep out, because their actions are none of their business except for the forms of speaking out in mediation efforts for peace. For if states are supported which are attacked by war, then aid in the form of arms and other war material should not be supplied for this purpose, but in such a case it is imperative that through words of reason and rationality it be peacefully sought and settled that the warlike debacle be brought to an end. This, however, is not being observed with regard to the war between Ukraine and Russia. Instead, the opposite and irresponsible partisan action is being taken in such a way that the disaster of the war is continuing all the more through partisan deliveries of weapons to Ukraine, which are being used against the aggressor Russia, whereby nothing is being gained, but only lost above all many valuable human lives, as well as through senseless destruction of human achievements that are important for well-being, prosperity, progress and health. All of the war in Ukraine, as has been the case since time immemorial in various states of the earth in which America has waged war and since then has had its offshoots and permanent stations in these states, is clearly in the hegemonic sense of America and also in the aspirations of its dark government. This inevitably creates the danger that America will be in charge in those various states of earth in which it has already crept in, warlike or otherwise, so that these states will be unintentionally affected, whether they like it or not. The coming time of the future will bring much more harm than good, as you know from your observations when you watched and saw the development of the future with Sfahov. In particular, the inexperienced, intellectually and rationally limited persons in the state leadership and among the population are to blame for the fact that the war between Ukraine and Russia has not yet come to an end, but is still raging on and spreading death, ruin and destruction. The whole thing also leads to the fact that other states and their stupid and power-obsessed, irresponsible leaders start wicked attacks and wars with neighboring states and plunge the world into turmoil, distress and misery, with human beings being murdered again indiscriminately, women being raped, killed and senseless destruction being caused. The war in Ukraine is an incentive for the leaders of other states to also unleash warlike attacks and actions and to impose war on neighboring countries. Consequently, the Ukraine war will unleash coming examples, as you know.
Yes, you are right, because unfortunately all that is coming is more than unpleasant. Everything is partellated, whereby, if I may mention names, especially in Germany Baerbock and in the European Union dictatorship von der Leyen are the main actors who carry out their shameful work in a warmongering way, and indoctrinate the various fellow travelers of the parties and make the same sense as they themselves do. With their hate speech against Russia they make all misery and hardship worse, bigger and more comprehensive, and thereby encourage like-minded people to support the delivery of weapons to Zelensky to be used in the war against Russia. As a counteraction, Russia cuts off the important gas against the West, but this is the fault of the Western countries themselves, namely that they interfere in the war in a partisan way and fulfill Zelensky's begging for weapons. And that America, with its NEYTOW, is behind it all and is really the ringleaders of the Ukraine war, because they want to capture Russia, of which the decent and good of the American population know nothing, because they are lied to and deceived by the fallible of the government and the shadow government that remains in the dark, and are consequently innocent and ignorant of the secret hegemonic policy machinations and intelligence crimes and so on. This does not occur to the stupid leaders and those of their populations of other countries who diligently shout their pro and hurrah for Russia to be more and more reviled, that is to say discredited. Of course, Russia should not be excused and lifted to the skies and portrayed as better than it really is, because a state that wages war is always in the wrong, even if it is provoked to do so, as happened by America and NETA, with the European Union dictatorship also secretly involved in the background, although only a few are aware of this. But mainly it was America that provoked the war in order to further satisfy the delusion of hegemony and to further expand the NETA murderous organization's killing field. But America will go the way it has also gone with many other states and peoples since time immemorial, for it will one day disappear from the map as the state of the United States of America, even if it will only be in the distant future. But it will then be a fact that the world power America will one day commit suicide through its behavior of hegemony, as it has already become the fate of other world powers at earlier times on Earth. America's downfall as a state, the United States of America, will be inevitable. It will not be defeated from the outside, but it will destroy itself from within, as has already been attempted in Switzerland by idiots in the Bern government, in that Switzerland's neutrality has been very seriously damaged because sanctions against Russia have been adopted by the European Union dictatorship and applied against Russia. And not to mention the danger that was to be taken by having Switzerland conduct military maneuvers together with the murderous organization NATO. Well, America, that is to say the United States of America, will not exist forever, because as a state it is destroying and self-destructing from within, for which the process of dissolution of the state, although still continuing for a long time, began a long time ago. This process has been continued and kept alive, actually unconsciously, by the German descendant President Trump, so that the coming demise of America as a state will one day in the still distant future become reality. The United States of America will lose its hegemony and thus the world power that is hoped for and aspired to in this regard, which is currently still America's endeavor, precisely to win world supremacy. However, the fact that the United States of America is already in the process of a creeping suicide, that is to say suicide which has been evident for some time now through certain symptoms, is not yet recognized by anyone, because no one thinks about it but simply lives into the day. The United States of America, that is to say its powerful, still think of themselves as a superpower, because many technical achievements convey a sense of security which, however, has already begun to crumble in its foundations, which will one day bring its downfall. America underestimates the ruthlessness of its hegemonic behavior, and it also underestimates its democratic future, because within itself there is a ruthless willingness to use violence and discontent in very many human beings of the American population. Already the ancient immigrants, mainly from Europe, created networks of hatred against the original population, the Indians, and the World West also took its inglorious role in killing many human beings. This, as wars also raged in America and slavery was big in trade when in Africa, and so on, the human beings of a different color were robbed and chained, shipped and brought to America if they survived at all. For example, when a storm broke out on the high seas and the chained slaves were simply thrown overboard because the ship had to be lightened in the storm and swell. The human beings who were robbed and chained were pulled alive by the heavy chains into the deep waters of the sea and thus left to die. Among the many Europeans who kept slaves in America and made great business and profits from the work of the shackled slaves were also Swiss, such as the builder of the Length Canal and the Scotty confectionery manufacturer. America profited from the slaves who were flayed and murdered, with the murder secret society Ku Klux Klan in particular playing the leading role as a murderous race hatter, and to some extent still playing it today. and that America's first president was a murderer who shot a peace negotiator for no reason, who wore a white flag and could not even utter a word of his noble cause of negotiating peace that was obligingly concealed and never made public. And indeed there would be more such incidents to say, but what has been said should be enough to understand that America is not what it claims to be. Well, the United States of America as a state will one day self-destruct and disintegrate from within itself and from within itself, because the United States of America state structure is only a sham, isolating itself from its own people and from the rest of the world through its internal security. America distrusts everything and everyone and refuses to sit at its own table to anyone who wants to bring true law as well as good humanity and humanly just laws to the country. America has always had presidents and lackeys around it as well as all over the world who simply carry out orders and commit murder and wage wars without hesitation, interfere with intelligence services everywhere and cause mischief and unconscionably extinguish human lives. And this is done, advocated, and ordered by the American leadership, causing hardship and misery as well as the greatest damage also by the religious sects that exist in America and are created again and again, some of which fathers and sect members do not shy away from sexual abuse of daughters or other child abuse as with Catholic dignitaries, and also from enrichment through murder. However, if anyone dares to speak the truth about it, they are threatened with life, as happened to me when I once said something against the practices of America. Already believes that it is the ruler of the world, but this illusory empire will one day become a mirage that will shatter, because the United States of America will inevitably isolate itself from the rest of the world, even if this is not yet visible and recognizable to many human beings, but is already the still hidden beginning of its downfall. On top of all this, there is climate change, whereby America is unable to interpret the climatic warning signs and is also inexorably running to its doom in this respect over time. Not to mention the corona plague, which is also claiming many victims in America, as well as pompousness and criminality and actual crime and murder, and so on, surpassing anything that can still be called normal. War is and remains America's profession for conquering the world, and just as it was looking for a reason to attack North Korea in 1964, it is now desperately looking for one to intervene directly and not secretly, as it has done up to now, together with its NATO in the war in Ukraine. America also wants to dominate Ukraine and adapt it to the West, and is blaming all the evils in Ukraine on the Russians. Along with you, Bermunda, I have seen Ukrainian military pro forma firing into the air, running patrols and attacks that were truthfully just staged and made for news against the Russians. It was also interesting that in the war reports on TV, many buried bodies were found in a forest allegedly massacred by the Russians, yet Christian wooden crosses were placed on the graves throughout, which is really so unusual and strange that one has to wonder why the enemy still honors its victims on the graves with tryst crosses. What is clear is that the Americans want to dominate Ukraine and thus Russia one day, which is why everything was also done to make Putin lose patience and start the war, which has now lasted half a year and can go on for a long time due to the stupidity of the arms suppliers, which undoubtedly plays into the hands of America and the NATO murdering organization. America is deceiving not only its own people but the whole world about the real United States of America intentions. All war crimes committed by the Ukrainian military are categorically and despite evidence denied, falsified, and furthermore blamed on the Russians, also self-airing and self-bombing, as we could observe ourselves together. But the truth is presented as fake by the Russophobes, and thus everything is distorted. America has more internal enemies than can be imagined, who are doing much to bring about the end of this state, even though it will be a long time before that happens. America will be hit with the full force of repressive gavotte from within, when the still clandestine opposition will one day abruptly reveal what it actually wants. Many tens of thousands will one day, as has already happened with Trump, not only take to the streets in protest but take violent action to overthrow the government and put an end to the madness of U.S. hegemony and its own state.
This is another word from you that makes the truth so openly clear, as only a thinking human being is capable of expressing it and, moreover, knows the future. However, I ask you whether it is good if you write down later in the discussion report what you said about the future, what it will bring for America. We should not give exact predictions, but what you said that.
Do not worry, because I did not say when the whole thing of the prediction will happen. So everything remains unclear and so speculative that it cannot be determined when the prediction will happen and be fulfilled. Human beings, however, who are truly capable of observation and clear thinking, already see the signs of what is coming at the present time, but they will be prevented from doing anything about it. As is usual on earth, it will continue that those who really think and know, who are also able to honestly assess and recognize the truth, will be cut and not heard, but branded as conspirators and demonized in every conceivable form. So they will not be listened to but will be shouted down and vilified.
Then, however, I want to thank you for saying a word regarding the fact that human beings were robbed in Africa, thrown into the sea, or had to eke out a living as slaves in America, and that this also included notable Swiss slave owners who...
Thank you, but there would be a lot more to say about that, only there is not enough time. There are other things to talk about which are not for the ears of others than yours, but of these later. My thoughts are that all human beings should be treated equally and, moreover, as human beings, whether they are likable or not, whether they are in the right or in the wrong, whether they express themselves and behave as friends, that is to say friends, or in a hostile manner. The human being should also not harbor and cultivate prejudices against his fellow human beings, but always strive to find out the truth about his neighbor and to see, accept, and treat him as a human being in one way or another. In doing so, however, it is important not to conceal what is wrong and thus what is defective about a human being, but to name it unsparingly. It is certainly not acceptable that a human being should be kept as a slave, that he should be forced to work at all, and that racial hatred should exist and human beings should be murdered, and this also not through war, the death penalty in the form of the law, out of a desire for profit, hatred, or any form of relationship, out of love, misery and need, fear, greed, addiction, or anything else.
You are voicing what also had to be learned by our ancestors, but which only happened more than 52 years ago when...
Excuse me, but I know that because I know what happened then. But what is involved now is drawing the likenesses of Elijah, Jeremiah and Mohammed. Ptaah told me that you could draw these well from memory.
Yes, I can, however, I am not very skilled in this art.
It will be good enough for us to use the drawings, though, I'm sure. Just a moment here, you have paper. If you need more, you can just take it out of the photocopier, because I'm going over to the flat because I've got to do something, after which I'll come back here, of course. So until then it takes maybe about 10 to 15 minutes.
That will be about the time it takes me to do the 3 portraits.
Good, see you then.
There you are back. It was about 15 minutes and your coming is correct because I just finished the drawings. If you want to write on these, this is Jeremiah, this portrait is Elijah and this is Muhammad. You can be sure that the drawings really do represent the likeness of Elijah, Jeremiah and Muhammad, and that is as I remember the pictures that are kept with us in the library bowl.
I have no doubt about that, and as I look at your works, I remember that they really do look like those pictures I saw in the library. Thank you very much for your work.
A drawing was something I enjoyed doing. I also enjoyed it and took turns.
It's good then. Thank you again. Bernadette can then read in the drawings so that I can include them in the discussion report. Thank you for your effort of drawing.
It was really a pleasure.
I'm glad to hear that. But now I would like to discuss some things with you that are of a private nature and that I do not want to call up and write down later.
Of course, but after that I must go because I have to get back to my duties, which I interrupted and came here to let you know first that I am here again.
That is really sweet of you. Then I will not take long and bring out the following.